that this is an extremely weighty matter that needs to be treated with this seriousness it deserves. So yesterday, I'm sure you heard the PS from the Ministry of Education once again announcing that that the ministry will release funds to schools next week. We have lost count of the numerous times such promises have been made since the Kwanza regime took over. This is turning out to be a game of lies, managing the public on the one hand, while setting up school heads for failure, which the ministry has now perfected. No plausible reason has been given as to why funds that should have been disbursed earlier in the term are only being disbursed towards the end of the term, if at all they'll be disbursed. It is for this reason that we take the position that the Ministry of Education is setting up school heads and managers for ridicule, failure, and blame. In the process, our children are collateral. Whenever the Ministry of Education has come under pressure over disbursement of funds to schools, they do what they did yesterday. That is, they assemble the media, put together some figures, and announce that the money will be released the following week. Most times, it never gets done. And when it is done, it is never sufficient. It's a vicious cycle, really. Even if it were to be actualized, what the ministry announced yesterday would still amount to a mere 25% of money which is due to schools. Unfortunately, these funds are coming too little, too late. Whenever the ministry announces the funds or the release of the funds, suppliers flood schools, students make demands, and PTAs assume all is well, regardless of how small the amount released is or whether it actually ever gets released. The Ministry of Education is running the critical sector by setting up principals, school heads, and managers for failure, and then lying to learners and parents. This must stop. We are here to call out the government on the lies that have now crippled schools and exposed otherwise innocent principals, head teachers, and school managers to the wrath of parents and learners who buy into government lies that funds have been released to schools and other learning institutions. The casualty is none other than the millions of Kenyan learners who are staring at a bleak future. To say that schools are struggling because of acute financial problems is a serious understatement. Currently, the Kenya Kwanza administration owes close to Kenya shillings 52.8 billion in free-day secondary school fund, dating back to the year 2021. This is testament enough to the lack of commitment by the government to the future of this country's school-going children. Funds are yet to be remitted to schools for Form 1 students in secondary schools, whose first term is set to come to an end in a matter of weeks, in fact 2 weeks, from what I gather. Equally, there is neither any commitment nor indication from the government that when schools reopen for second term, the monies will have been disbursed. It is nothing short of a miracle, really, that the schools are open and running. However, the miracle is short-lived, since school administrators are running out of tricks to convince suppliers to keep supplying food items and learning materials to their schools. Feeding the students is an uphill task for the school administrators, and for some schools it is just a matter of time before there is student unrest due to hunger. we had the PS lament that this capitation money is not meant for feeding children or pupils. Well, he must be made to understand that there's a ripple effect. When you don't release capitation money, it affects every other school program. Okay? Directly or indirectly. In a bid to make ends meet, some schools have resorted to either increasing boarding fees, food rationing, or changing the students' menu altogether to make ends meet. The situation is dire, as for the first time since 2005, parents have been left with no choice but to buy exercise books for their children. Further, a number of schools are contemplating closing school earlier than scheduled and doing away with end-of-term tests because they can no longer afford basics like stationery. Some school administrators admit that they are forced to play hide and seek with school suppliers who are constantly and rightfully so demanding payments from these schools. In other cases, schools have resorted to slashing budget for extracurricular activities. It is as pathetic as it is chaotic. The present state of affairs in our schools is a great shame to this nation. The net effect of all current ongoings is that schools will resort to provision of compromised basic education, which will have incalculable ramifications on the standards of education in Kenya and the future of Kenyan children. In fact, the impact of this unfortunate turn of events is already being felt across the country in the form of mass failures. In last year's KCSE, for instance, over 49,000 candidates scored grade E. As you know, grade E is normally scored between marks of 0 to 5. This trend of increasing failure rates in high school has persisted for the last 3 years, with 2023 being the worst performed KCSE examination in the recent past. The ministry is silent about this because they know poor funding is a key contributor to such mass failures. Amid all the chaos in the education sector, the government is still not transparent about this matter and has resorted to open lies on the matter. In the current financial year, schools have only received a paltry Kenya shillings 7,300 out of the required Kenya shillings 22,200 per learner per annum. Other school officials say the figure disbursed is as low as 3,800 per learner. In any event, whatever the figure, it is way lower than the stipulated Kenya shillings 22,200. Given the foregoing, we demand that the government immediately stops the lies and releases the entire Kenya shillings 52.8 billion owed to schools. On the one hand, the government must also embark on timely disbursement of capitation funds, with the payment schedule made public to learners. On the other hand, the Ministry of Education must immediately cease the habit of withholding part of the school capitation without good reason. As a matter of fact, the current capitation amount was arrived at way back in 2017 and must therefore be adjusted upwards to take into account the rising inflation rate. We are challenging the Kwanza regime to come out and tell Kenyans whether it has done away with the free primary and free secondary education, because from the look of things, this seems to be the case. We are calling on teachers and parents to stop struggling in fear and to speak out boldly for our children, whose future is being stolen by this regime. Neither parents nor the head teachers should cover up for the government. Let it be known to all and sundry that things are not working in the education sector. School heads have run out of ideas to run schools without money, and parents cannot afford the monies that they were in fact promised that the government would cater for. The Kenya Kwanza must own up to the mess that is in the education sector and do what is right for our children and our hardworking teachers. So that's basically the end of the statement. And it is self-explanatory that if nothing is done urgently, we are likely to see a crisis of monumental proportions, not only in our high schools, but in the entire education sector. That something is not adding up. The government continues to promise release of capitation funds, and which funds never get to schools. What is happening between the promise and the National Treasury is something that is beyond our imagination. So thank you very much.